The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending Talent Guard's webinar on HR tips to help employees self-manage their career. Okay. I'm Linda Janak, and I'm the President and CEO of Talent Guard. Also the author of Fake Perfection, a story about career transition and the trials and tribulations that go along with that, and also the author of Professional in Career Management Training and Certification System for people who want to become certified career coaches. So I will, just some tidbits before I get started. This presentation is being recorded, and I will make it available on the website probably an hour or two after the conclusion of this webinar, but we'll send an email out letting you know that it's there for download, just in case you'd like to refer back to the information. And for those that are with me again, thank you. I know we have a lot of people on the line, and so you'll be familiar with the narrative format. For those that are new, I hope you enjoy the format, and as always, I'm open and interested in your feedback so that these can be more beneficial to you as you begin to roll out talent management programs within your organization. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, and I would ask that if we're going along and something pops up in your mind, a question or a comment, please just use the chat box, and at the end I will pull it up on screen and go through and answer as many as I can in the time allotted. So without further ado, I'd like to get started. This is Sarah. Most people know Sarah, if you've been to some of my presentations, as Miss HR. And Sarah works for an organization called Medco. It's a leading medical device company. It's an organization that we use to communicate a lot of the case studies that we have been through. And just a little bit about the company. Some of the challenges that this organization has been having is there's a difficult time recruiting top talent. And that's because in the medical device industry, a lot of the salespeople, which unlike any other industry has been passed down from generation to generation, with a lot of family members knowing a lot of doctors and their sons and daughters getting involved in that business as well. And it's a very small environment, so a lot of poaching goes along with hiring, and a lot of the organizations in the medical device field have contracts that go with each of their salespeople. So any one loss of a salesperson could represent a tremendous negative impact for an organization should someone leave. They have a retention issue, so that's something that Sarah has been tasked by the CEO to fix. And that's mainly because the organization has been growing through acquisitions, and especially globally across the span of 10 or 15 years. And it's put a tremendous strain and burden on the company, on the values, and really trying to become, one with one mission. They're also in a competitive industry, lots of business model changes as many organizations have gone through themselves. They have an initiative to bring out some new products, which means a lot of investment needs to be made in research and development, and that's going to require a different staff than they have today, since they have grown through acquisition, primarily acquiring the innovation that they've been seeking. They're about a $5 billion company. They want to grow to $10 billion in the next few years. They have about 15,000 employees, and they're a very strong company. So that's just a little bit about the company to give you some context about the story that we're going to unfold today. So before I get started, let me just tell you a little bit about some key findings that Sarah discovered as a result of doing a mini survey internally. And you may find some of these statistics to be similar in your own organizations, but about 63% were not satisfied with current career development programs. The average time in her organization dedicated to skill development was about 6 hours, and that included any books that they've read, conferences they've gone to, formal training workshops, things of that nature. And in my opinion, based on other organizations, that's pretty low. Only about 42% of her employees have development plans, and in our discussions with Sarah, a lot of those are not heavily acted upon, meaning updated often. and they have a pretty high turnover rate. They're about 20%. So there was a mission inside the organization to really fix some of these issues. And based on all of the research that Sarah had done and a lot of the discussions and conferences she attended, she felt that teaching employees how to self-manage their career was going to be critical for retention and engagement as the company continued to expand. So Sarah needed a better way to help employees self-manage their career because, as I said, some of the programs that Sarah had ongoing inside the organization just weren't cutting it. So instead of doing another survey, Sarah spent about 3 weeks just randomly, flying to and attending some of their campuses to talk to employees about really what career development meant to them. What was their definition? What types of things were they looking for? What did they think worked and didn't work, to really get that primary research in her hands so that she wouldn't just roll out something that would keep that dissatisfaction high. She really wanted to reduce it. So that was her approach to really gathering this information. And some of the takeaways from those discussions included some of the bullet points here. People, her employees, did not really understand how to strategically manage their career progression over time. And if you really think about that statement, it's pretty profound because you and I and our children and people who came before us were never really taught about how to manage our career. First and foremost, usually we joined a company and we stayed forever. And then with the .com growth, we were just running around taking opportunistically all these different positions that we could, and both of those complicated the situation. So most people have either ended up, actually I'll go far back as saying selecting a degree in a university and then taking that first job and getting into that career and then landing in the next role has really been, I think, something that's been haphazard and is a problem with our entire industry. So that is something that she wanted to put some focus on. How could we teach employees what it means to really manage the career? You know, many of us when we go on, if you think about travel, we have a map, we know where we're going to stop, we know where we need to get gas, where we're going to stop for food, all of those things. We know from the point of where we're leaving to the point where we're going to end up, where we want to go. Now, things can get off track from there, but that's okay. We want to teach employees how to make those shifts and to do it often because managing your career is not a one-time event. Career development plans are blurred with performance improvement plans, and it's often confusing for employees. So these two things in their organization were mirrored together, meaning just a true focus on you must improve these skills in order to perform in your current job and to stay employed, as a matter of fact, versus career development. Career development usually is all about the future tense. We want to get to some other destination, and that doesn't mean up the ladder. It can mean across the ladder or sometimes down the ladder when we're thinking about baby boomers who may want a decrease in responsibilities. So that was a problem inside her company. And another thing that was really big was the core belief inside the organization at Medco was that training was career development. And that is absolutely not right. It's inaccurate, to be honest. Training is a component of career development. It's a resource that we use to gain a new skill or to gain knowledge or capabilities or experience or whatever it may be. But it is not the end-all and be-all. And I noticed a lot of organizations focus almost 100% on this area, and we'll wrap that up as career development. So employees want some predictability in planning their career. Now, that doesn't mean guaranteed that they're going to get promoted. It means predictability. If I work on this career plan, I am going to develop these skills, and I am going to get interesting projects, and I am going to have rewards and recognition. Some predictability, but not a guarantee that they're going to move up. Although if people are improving their skills and if the company is either growing like Medco is, there's lots of room for advancement, and advancement meaning up or across. Again, I want to make that clear because I truly believe, as somebody who's been doing a lot of career development for, the span of 20 years, that career lattice is really important, and it's a word that should be used often in organizations over the career ladder. And what she also found out that employees are very happy to manage their career, but they don't really see it as a self-managed career. They see it as a co-managed. They believe that they need to take the reins and they need to set the direction, but they want support from management. So, we say self-managed to truly mean take accountability, but it really is a joint effort. And where this company was falling down was, one, they weren't really doing career development. They were doing performance improvement, and the managers didn't really know how to facilitate that career development discussion. So those are just some of the takeaways. Some of the questions that came up in Sarah's conversation are some of these, and there are a lot more. I'm just showing you the ones that seem to have a reoccurring theme. What competencies are required in other roles? What learning gaps do I have? How are employees being identified across the company for specific role vacancies? What are the lateral moves? I don't know what they are. Can you share those with me so I know when and if I can move across the organizations? What resources are going to specifically help me develop in a role that I'm interested in? What about international opportunities? Am I able to explore those? And if so, how do I get access to them? And then how long does it typically take to progress in a role? And then what other career options are available in my company? So you can see the theme here being a lot about career pathing and career road mapping and competency development toward a specific destination. A couple of the things that came out just as a side note from Sarah's discussions was that, yes, the organization and the employees were very happy that they were having career fairs and they got to learn about different things, but it wasn't really getting to the meat of how do I develop my career. The career fair was good for saying, hey, here are people in these careers, and here are some things that are available to you. It's good for knowledge, but it was not good for showing them, that step-by-step process for, now, how am I going to move from step A to step B? Because as you know, in the organization, it is not that simple. I've oftentimes, and even in this organization, have seen people quit the company, go work for someone else, and come back in a new role because they couldn't get that role. And that's extremely frustrating. And it's a huge loss for an organization. So how can we avoid those sorts of things? Well, what I'm going to share is Sarah's approach to how she actually went about changing her environment to be one of really career empowerment. So the 3 programs that we're going to talk about today include a career management for employees training program, a career pathing framework that they implemented from scratch in order to make a self-managed career program work, and then the ability to track the career development, the future development of the employee so that everybody could take notice of where are we at in the process, and so that HR could see, wow, in this pool of talent that I have, who's actually ready to take on roles. So that kind of stretches a little bit over into succession planning, but my conversation stops at development so that we can do what her goal was, and that's improved retention and improved engagement. So I often say organizations lose heart. So how do we put some heart back into the workforce so that we can get employees who are excited to come to work? So let's talk about Program 1. You'll see it's color-coded so you know where the programs start and end. Career Management for Employees. So what she did was, and this is how she actually found Talent Guard, she wanted to find if there was a training program out there that would teach employees how to be self-sufficient in managing their career direction while soliciting the right level of input from management when it was needed. So it's really all about that personal vision. How do we help this employee align their personal life mission with the company? What are their true skills and interests? Because if you ask most people, and having gone through probably 2,500 transitions with individuals, I can vouch and tell you that most people can only account for about a quarter of the skills that they have. And what sort of planning process can an employee follow that gives them some level of roadmap to let them know that they're on the right track? So I'm just going to share a little bit about what that, basically it was a 2-day seminar, what that seminar does for employees. So a couple of things that comes out of the program is that employees learn how to create a paper-based career roadmap that includes methods for gaining critical skills, helps them identify competencies needed to pursue a career path. So often what will happen in the training is I'll say to an employee, all right, what careers are you interested in within your company? And I will teach them the process of how do you identify the competencies that you have right now based on your current role and all the other skills that you've brought to this company from other companies and from other roles, and then how do you do your own gap analysis, and it's cursory and you can't get too detailed, but how do you do that so that you can see truly where you're lacking? That one process in and of itself, if that's the only thing that you could teach someone how to do, that is the most beneficial thing that you can teach someone, because it truly shows them where the gaps are, and then we can start thinking about, if you have coaches in your organization, how to fill those gaps with learning. So that's really important. What does a career development plan really look like? What goes in it? How many resources? How often do you update it? When do you share it? When do you solicit feedback? Those sorts of things. How do you define your branding story? So how do you teach people to talk about themselves when they're rising up in an organization so that they don't sound pompous or they don't sound like they're underselling their skills? It's especially important for women who typically downplay themselves in this area. So how can you define a story that's compelling and then use the tools in-house or create tools for yourself in-house to be able to talk about yourself in the right way so that when these opportunities come up, your name is coming up on the top of the list? I do believe that no matter where employees are, it's important for them to always have an updated resume, and they should always have an updated, and I use social media as in LinkedIn profile, because it helps for someone over time to really take stock of who they are. Helps people look beyond just skill, but at strength, abilities, interests, what things really drive you and that you're passionate about. That's the most difficult thing that people have a hard time with, is truly understanding what their interests are and putting it on a piece of paper, because interests really start from when we're children, and then we're often told to shut that noise off and then just go for what we have to do based on what we pursued in school, or completely, go left field and leave what we learned in school and do something else. This is where interests really drive people. What does a short-term and a long-range plan looks like, and how do you really set expectations in the right way for yourself? And that comes a lot with teaching people that just because you're working on a plan that's going to take you from sales to marketing doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. So how do you set the right expectations so that you're not always thinking up? We do a lot of training around the lattice. How do you go about researching careers internally? What can you do leveraging the resources that you have to start learning more about it? Because what we found is a lot of organizations don't have a lot of career information. What they have is probably an automated ATS or an internal ATS that lists open vacancies, but people aren't really sure how to really go about researching the role to identify, is this going to be a role that I actually like? Is it going to be a role that I really want to be in, that my interests are going to be aligned with? And then how do you network internally so that you can hear about opportunities and not just see them posted online, so that it doesn't, interfere with your current role? How do you approach the discussion with your manager? How do you approach the discussion with HR? Those sorts of things are really important. And I won't go through this agenda. I really put it here so that when you download it later, you can see the specific agenda and what's taught, but I'm just going to highly kind of walk through what the program looks like. Career fundamentals is kind of a little bit of what we just talked about. What does a career look like over the lifespan, and how does one's view toward their career change as they continue to mature in age? And how are different diversities in cultures impacted by the term career, and what does it mean to them? So really digging into that. That's what career fundamentals is all about. Magnifying your talents is really leveraging a lot of different assessments that they can use to really get to know themselves. As I said, it's all about the skills, the knowledge, the capabilities, experience, and then I kind of add on qualifications, and being able to come up with what I call a touchstone, an ideal view of who you are, so that you can take that with you as you continue to grow your career with the organization. Then what we look at is, based on all those interests, how do I align myself with what's available in my organization? Or how do I identify white space? How do I take these talents and then apply them towards something that's really going to be impactful for me and meaningful for the organization? Then how do I target my learning? So how do I look through all the learning resources that my organization may have in the LMS or in the organizational development department, and or if you're a small organization, externally, because there's a lot of free resources that are available to us that we just don't take advantage of. But, you know, based on where I want to go with my career path and how I want to roadmap it, what are those really important things that I can tie on to my development plan that will truly move the needle as I'm continuing my journey? That whole branding strategy, there's a 5-point strategy of how do you bring your brand together and how do you expose that in the workplace, and then how do you truly network. And networking is important, as you know, as an organization, because it can facilitate projects, not just individual career development, but projects and discussion and communication. And, you know, how do you surround yourself with people, because people rise up in groups, not just one by one, so that you're really identifying where you need to be. So when those moves happen, you can really take advantage of your long-term career plan. So that's kind of those 6 modules. So once Sarah, and this is kind of how she stepped it out, she trained them first, and that program took about, I'd say probably about 2 months to unfold, and we did it with just a portion of the population, not with everyone, but that population as the pilot, where it was then the successful campaign for the rollout later. So in program 2, what we found was that in this organization, they had done, they hadn't really done any kind of what I'm going to call formal career pathing. You know, people had moved in the organizations and they had some great stuff on the website, mostly the internal intranet website, that really tried to get employees to know that we really care about internal mobility, had some career fairs, had a great LMS system, but that's really where it ended. It still didn't answer the questions that we raised earlier of what opportunities are available to me and how can I move, what can I do, how, you know, what's a progression timeline look like. So Sarah really wanted to implement a program that would truly enable employees to self-manage their career. So what was required after the training, once they knew how to do it, they needed the information and the tools to be able to use at their leisure, whether they were at work or at home, to start building out their plans. And that's where the second part comes in. So Sarah wanted to have a comprehensive framework that enables employees to independently identify and compare themselves in that current role that they're in right now to some future role. And as you can imagine, I'd say it was almost 100% of the employees who had a career plan compared themselves to the CEO. Everybody wants to know, what does it take to get there? So that was just kind of a funny thing that came out of it. But what they also need to know, once they know they're interested in these roles, is how do I understand how to fill the gap between role A and role B and role C and role D, and what kind of timeline can I anticipate? And so what we do in working with organizations, and specifically with Sarah, is help organizations give us the information we need to come up with these right timelines. And we compare them against the benchmarks that we have in the industry, in each industry, to make sure we're coming up with what's reasonable and what's reasonable for each industry and each size company. So that's kind of what we looked at. So in order for career pathing to work, an organization has to have, an HR department has to have 4 key things. They have to have job role profiles, and I'm going to break each one of these down. That is the structured job areas and families and the specific roles with all the details so that someone can identify, and they have to be standardized so that we can run comparisons. The employee profile, well, an employee has to be able to self-assess their skills and capabilities and be able to demonstrate where they have talent. We have to be able to, from the job role and the employee profile, perform some level of gap analysis. That means that there needs to be some type of leveling system or some type of family system that enables us to run those comparisons. And then progression planning, that visual, because most people are visual representation of a career roadmap and estimated percentages of fit and timelines and all that fancy stuff that typically comes along with career pathing. Now, where most people start out in career pathing is using lots of paper. Now, that works for an organization that has less than, I'm going to say 50 to 75 job roles. But when you're dealing in an organization of this size, 15,000, they typically have about 1,600 to 25 unique job roles. That's really hard to map out, especially if you're showing lateral moves and international moves and a lot of that growth. I actually built a map for Campbell Soup actually one time and tried to show them this is how their map looks, and it was scary as can be. So, sometimes you can break that down into chunks and pick, what's the most sought after role or what's the most popular role, the most hard to fill, but then you're only getting one tiny snapshot in time. So if you truly want to enable career pathing at its most potential, then you really have to have technology to manage that number of those number of roles. So we're just going to give an example of the 4 boxes that we've talked about for those organizations that haven't yet started, or you may be in the midst of formulating this stuff. This will give you a great little roadmap to help you understand the type of information required if you want to provide employees with that self-career management. So the way I'm defining a job area is I'm calling an area, that kind of top-level category, sales. Then the job family would be all those different areas that fall under sales. Typically, you might see this in an org chart structure so that we have the same terminology that we're using so that you can follow the presentation. So we have a job area, top level, job family, kind of that secondary level. And then you can see here we have product, account, management, market development, online sales, and inside sales. These are going to be unique to every single organization, and it's going to depend on size and industry. Then let's kind of take it another notch. So you have your job area, your job family, and then you have your job roles. This should be pretty basic to most people. And the way that Medco separated their specific organization is they had international roles versus regional roles. And what you see in the dotted lines from the lowest, kind of the professional roles in that light green, starting with global sales assistant, moving up to that darker green where it starts to turn into leadership, that would be your traditional career ladder, right? Same with the regional, that'd be your traditional career ladder. But within even just these two, we have approximately 27 different career paths at a minimum that can happen. If you count up, assistant to manager, that's one, manager to product manager. But what happens if you go from global assistant to sales assistant or sales assistant to global? Each one of those is considered a unique career path. So we have to think about it in that context. So you can see why it's not just the number of job roles you have, but it's all the connections that can happen in between that can start to complicate the process for HR. And that's where they start to get a little nervous, and that's where we come in. But if you have this fundamental structure, you've got the basis, an excellent base from which you can start to help employees self-manage. Now, let's just break down that low-level part, the job role. Now within Medco, they started with one competency model, and that competency model is really what I'm going to call behavioral competencies. So what are those, I'm going to call them values, if you will. What are those values or behavioral competencies that span across the entire organization? So we had that model. But what they didn't have was what I'm going to call functional competencies, functional work competencies per area. So sales would have their own, marketing would have their own, development would have their own, that span all of the job families. So what does that look like? So the first thing that Medco needed to do was figure out with the sales area, what are the competencies within sales that we want people measured on, and that we want to build competency as a company and as an organization in. So they defined 10 competencies that matter, so they're right within the sweet spot of the number of competencies needed. And you can see I've highlighted needs assessment, and I've highlighted that for a reason, because I'm going to follow that one competency area throughout the rest of this discussion. So you need functional competencies. You need experience. How do you define the type of experience that someone needs per role to help people understand, are they a fit or not, or how long is it going to take for them to progress? Qualifications, and I use that term loosely. What it means is it could be a certification, it could be a bachelor's degree, it could be a language, it could be, for example, you need regional experience before you go international. All of those sorts of things that are qualifications that somebody would have to have in order to move forward. And then work style preference. These can be all over the board, and I've seen lots of different types, from flex time to overtime, national travel, relocation. It's whatever your organization typically, I would call its preferred benefits, that sort of thing that you want to highlight. It's also the things that you want to put in here are the things that you as HR or as managers want to use to be able to then find employees, right? So you'd say, I want to find an employee that has needs assessment, networking, forecast, that has these experiences, that has these qualifications, and who want international travel and speak Spanish. And then, boom, a whole bunch of people would come up if you're using the succession model. But on the career side, we would be able to tell employees this is exactly what you need. So you have to have detailed job role profiles for each of your, in this case, they had 1,600 for each of their roles. It doesn't mean they need to be exhaustive. We just have to have something that we can compare. And a lot of times, and even in this case, we started with the sales group, and then we moved to the marketing group, and then we moved on to the healthcare department. So we had lots of different ones, and we just rolled them out. You know, it took almost a year to roll out the entire job role profile, but each time more value was being added because it wasn't only inter-department, it was across department. What does it take to go from being a clinician to heading up a marketing product group for the instruments that you were using when you were actually installing the devices? So that sort of thing. So let's take that functional work, that first component, and look at it. So typically what's going to happen, as you probably have structured in your organization, but if not, what I show typically, or what I create, or what I recommend creating, is you show all those, and I'm only showing 6 of the 10 that was there, but needs assessment. Then what you have to do is identify for each one of those the indicators that people would be measured against. So how do I know that this person is qualified for the role, or has the skill required to move to the next role? So as you can see here, I only spelled out a few for needs assessment. This is where I'm at right here. Asks questions, collects relevant information, and uses systems. Now, this was completely filled out for Medco, but I didn't want to just get stuck with you looking at a competency model with indicators. I really just wanted to show you as a framework, this is how you would start to roll that out. And then once we have that, once we have these functional work competencies, then we would go into the next step, which is creating levels. Now, typically with levels is going to come a more sophisticated organization or a larger organization, at least over 500 employees typically. That's where I kind of put the level threshold at. So what you're going to see here, right, is competency 1, that's what we called it, needs assessment. You're going to have some level of description. And then you can see here the specific indicator, ask questions, That's the same one on the first list prior. And then we have the skills, the experience, and the qualifications. Now we're using just a 3-level basic experience mastery. Some use 4. Some say foundational, basic experience, and coach or master. These are all going to be determined based on your culture. You could use fun words even. Walks on water. And then what we have to do, and this is pretty straightforward because there are competency models that exist from numerous organizations, including ours, that help you determine what these basic experience and mastery level thresholds are. Because if we don't have this down, it's difficult to run comparisons because we won't know what the gaps are. So I'm just showing you a basic example of a basic skill. Now some people have 1 bullet, some people have many, and it's really up to each organization. Like I said, it can be simple or it can be highly sophisticated. Couple of experiences here, and then for asking questions, there is no specific qualification. So you would do this for every competency and for every indicator that you have. Boom. Now you've got everything you need to enable employees to start playing with career pathing. So what does HR really need to do to make it happen? Well, now that we have all the roles and we've got our role profiles, it's really important for HR, and we work with you, to figure out, okay, for each of our core roles, in each of the core roles, there's 1,600 of them. What are the feeder roles and what are the next roles? So we start with a spreadsheet that looks like this. So we can see there are a couple roles that feed into Global Sales Manager, and that role feeds into some next roles. Now, I kept it simplified here. The next roles can be lateral and they can be upward moves. So we define that in the system, but what we don't do is expose it to employees in the beginning, and I'll show you an example, because we don't want employees thinking just up. So the nature of how you expose this, and I literally have presented this in a spreadsheet to employees, and it's better than nothing, but it doesn't really help them go as far as they need to. But if you just had something like this, that's a great start. Excuse me. So this is kind of the basis for how you're going to start to think about role progression. Now, what I usually tell organizations is start with one department. What are all the roles within sales, that area, within the families, that can be lateral and that can be up? Let's start there. Then you go to the next department and the next department. Then we start crossing over departments. That's going to be the easiest method to roll out career pathing in your organization. So when you're thinking about really providing these tools to employees and what's going to be the best use of time and the most easily adopted, it's just that. Okay, now we talked a lot about the job role. Now, as I said, you also need to have an employee profile. And in that employee profile, so let's kind of take a look, the job role, so employee gets in the system or employee picks in a spreadsheet where they are, and we know this is Eric. Eric's been in our presentations before. He's a global sales assistant within the international area. So because we've assigned that role to Eric, it's automatically going to assign him the minimum criteria that we've defined in that job role profile on those 4 areas, the skill, the capabilities, the qualifications, and work style preferences. So that's automatically assigned to his profile. So the first time he logs in, he sees his basic assessment with that level of information. However, Eric then has the ability to go in and self-assess his skills and update the levels. So if he thinks that, you know, it's this little green dot showing that he has basic, he can move it to skilled or he can move it to mastery, because he may have more than, again, the minimum criteria is what we typically set. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it, and I hear this a lot from HR, is, well, what if employees over-assess themselves and rate themselves as higher than they actually have? Well, there's a mechanism for that. The manager can actually change it and approve it so that, you know, we've got some level of objectivity in there. But truly based on my experience working through these projects employees often underestimate their level of ability. And as I'm training people in that first part, you know, when you're thinking about really truly what your skills are, it is of no benefit to you to overrate yourself on all these different areas, because you're truly going to miss the learning opportunity, and you're not really going to see where you are and what you need to fix in order to move ahead. So you know, that's really just something that you have to communicate to employees. But this is just an example, and you can see here that asks questions, collects the information, use a system, then it goes into your experiences, that sort of thing. So now we have a comprehensive employee profile. So what does that enable you to do now as an organization? Well, let's just look. We said that Eric was a global sales assistant. So based on all that role progression that Sarah did with us, we can see here you can have up to 8 different roles that can pop up, but only 4 popped up as quote-unquote close matches. Now there's other ways, like he can see what are the predetermined career paths, but he's just building his own. He just wants to see what comes up and pick and choose himself. So we can see, you know, how much of a match he is for that specific role. But, you know, what's hard to see is which ones are lateral, which ones are up or down. It's presented in this fashion, again, as I reiterated earlier, so that an employee doesn't choose based on upward mobility only, that they're truly picking based on interests. And each one of these, you can click it and see all the details of the job role. You can see the gaps before you actually add it to your plan. So his starting point truly was global sales assistant, and he wanted to go 3 steps out. And this would build out a plan, and this plan can be 10 years long. Just depends on how we've programmed it. But this gives Eric a visual way to truly see where he's at and where he needs to be. So, you know, sometimes you can be overqualified too. That's an important thing. So especially if you're a baby boomer, as I said, and you want to decelerate, you might be 125% overqualified. That's not a bad thing. So what does it look like? So now we've got the job profile, we've got the employee profile. Employees are running these job path scenarios. Now they want to start really, they're interested, they're creating these paths, they're saving them, they want to start executing on them. Well, where we fall down in HR is we don't provide the resources, or we have tremendous amount of resource internally, but we don't have it assigned to these paths. Like, how do you go from one to the next? So it's not relevant. So what we're going to see here is then how do we make it relevant through gap analysis. So this is just a visual representation to show Eric's current role is the global sales assistant, and it is an upward move to regional sales manager. And if you look back at those slides before, you can see that it's kind of higher up on the rank in regional. So what we're doing under the covers, or what has to happen, or what you have to serve up, even if it's in a spreadsheet, is the comparison between Eric and his role and how he rated himself or changed his profile to that regional sales manager. So we're going to show you an example of what that will look like. So we saw that he was a match. So again, what it's going to do is, depending on the rating scale that you're using, we used kind of 3 basic scales. We're showing that Eric has some of the skills developed in this specific area and not all of them. So there's a gap. Yellow means there's something in progress. It's close to being completed, but not yet. So there's a gap. And then we can see under use a system, he's completely filled the requirement to go from his current assistant role to the regional sales manager. So this gives an employee with just one fast glimpse, oh, I know specifically the areas where I am not up to par, so now I know exactly what I can focus on to then do my skill building for my career plan. So what does that look like? So we're going to move into the third component of Sarah's program, which is truly that career development. And what do we mean by development? Well, what we're talking about here is a systematic method to track my personal career aspirations, the resources to close the gap that HR has afforded me, and to monitor progress toward the achievement of my goals. And it also allows for feedback and recognition by managers and or external coaches if you're using them. So the three areas we're going to talk about are how do we align our learning management resources so that employees can self-develop and pick the development options that they want to add to their plan and then move forward with and get approval from their manager on. How do we track the progress, and then how do we get the appropriate feedback? Because as we said in the beginning, employees want to self-manage, but they truly want that collaboration from management. So as we went through the kind of that assessment phase, and as we're teaching employees how to assess, we're helping them look for what are their gaps, what do other people think they have gaps on, and sometimes if you want to enhance the system, you'd use a 360. You're probably already using those already, but then how do you leverage that data, not only from him but from others, right? And you have to look at gaps and strengths at the same time. So what we're really trying to do with the gap analysis, just so we're specific, is we're looking at that current capability, that future capability, and then we're going to serve up development resources between the two. So what does that look like? So let's go back to our competency 1, which is the needs assessment. And as you saw, it's the ask the question, the same exact model here. The only difference between basic and experienced now is we're answering the question, what's required to fill the gap? And we're going to have a list of resources that have been predetermined or that will be determined by UHR or some other independent third party of here are the specific things that are going to close the gap between the basic level and the experienced level of this specific role. And it will look across, like I said, all roles, all departments, all those different things. So that gives an employee some level of, okay, if I go through these, I should be able to expect that I'll fit the minimum requirement going forward. And it's going to, again, look across not only basic and experience, but experience to mastery, because those are the levels that you have selected. And again, you can serve it up like this in a spreadsheet, which I've done, or you can serve it up electronically. So if you serve it up electronically, what it looks like is very much the same as what we saw before. You have your area, where your gap is, serves up your learning resources, and then you pick the ones. You can pick all of them if you want to, and then you can add ones that are not on here later because you have development planning, and you pick them and you'd add them to your specific development plan so that you can then track them. So what we're doing in this scenario to help employees self-manage is we're being a lot more prescriptive but not controlling. So we're saying here are the things that we know are going to help you move. You have some choices, and then as I said, you can go add some. Because in your specific development plan, and you can see they were picked and moved over, same exact ones, but then he has here one that was not on his plan that he added, and now he can monitor it, edit it, get information. Just a nice way to track it. Now you can do this on paper. As you know, we've been doing it for decades now, but it's not interactive, and you're not going to be able to solicit that level of feedback from your manager or from your coaches or from HR, whoever you want to get that feedback from and manage it, unless we have a tool. So that just enhances the adoption. So having that interactive development plan that feeds from teaching employees how to manage their career to giving them the resources to actually do the career development to then giving them the resource to actually track it to see if they're hitting some level of attainment, all that does, that whole process drives accountability and it drives self-sufficiency. And that theoretically, and actually in this case, will drive that retention and loyalty moving forward. So a couple of notes, though, about development plans that we shared, that Shara is going to share with you, is development plans are future-oriented. Let's keep the development plan separate from her basic skill development PIP plan. It has to contain specific learning because employees will spend oodles of time searching on Google on communication skills. Well, you may be excellent in all communication areas except for executive presentation skills, which we would have served up. Here are the 5 things that we think, that we know are going to close that gap, because we're being, like I said, a little more prescriptive. Employees should focus on 1 or 2 development areas every few months. You see a lot of people having 50 or 60 on their plan, or 10 or 12. That's too much. So we have to set the expectation that development takes time, which is why we have progression timelines. It should contain reasonable, attainable goals. Everybody always talks about that. So, you can't go from, assistant to CEO in 5 years. It's not reasonable. So that comes in a lot of that upfront training. At some point, we have to recognize and reward participants, because if the company is growing or even if it's evolving, it has to be sustainable. And to be sustainable, we have to allow some level of mobility, like I said, whether it's across with project responsibility or up. And then we have to educate managers on how to get involved in the process. And there's a great resource on our website of Managers as Career Coaches, which I think is excellent sister companion to this specific presentation that supports the process once employees kind of engage themselves in it. Kind of some best practices that came out of this particular project with Medco, as well as others, is as you start to unfold some of these opportunities, you're not going to have a mad rush where everybody's creating it all at once. What we saw was about 32% of the employee pool that we engaged in this process created career plans or career roadmaps. It's the same thing within the first month. By month 3, another 39% had created plans, and then by the end of about 6 months, which was our pilot phase, we had another 18% on. So we had a huge percentage who had at least one plan. Now, a couple other interesting notes. The average number of unique paths per employee were 6. So what that means is they had 6 different unique career paths, starting from their role to different roles, and how they were going to end up in either the same or different destinations. The average number of steps in each career path was 4, so people were kind of trying to plan out 4 steps ahead. You saw in Eric's, he only planned out 3. The average number of development resources per competency area, so what you saw in that learning resource chart, was about 3. We didn't want to overwhelm people with, here are all the 50 options you can choose from. Keeping it at about 3 was good. Employees were updating their profile about 3 times in a 12-month period, just by keeping their skills up to date, whether it was after a performance review or whatnot. About 2.6 weeks, the average, so every 2 to 3 weeks, somebody was updating that development planning, adding a note, adding a comment, responding to someone's comment, putting the percent complete, that sort of thing. And average who made internal career changes as a result of the program averaged over a 1-year period, and these were up, down, and across, was about 15%. So that was really cool. And what was really cool about that number is HR got to use that in the recruiting process and got to put that on their website. So that was a huge benefit for the recruiting team to use when trying to get other employees also in the company. That career mobility, we're proving it. Here's our number. Because our ultimate goal at the end of the day is, not only risk mitigation, which I know we get hit with a lot, but to truly help our organization be the best place to work and to build a culture and a company where people love their jobs. And I don't believe in going to work every day and not being happy. I do believe that you should be happy, and there's no reason why we can't be. It's just that sometimes, again, we're not trained to think about the things that we like, because we turn those kind of children voices off in our mind way early in our career. And what this opportunity does is it gives you the ability to turn that voice back on. Some of Sarah's advice before we kind of go to the Q&A. When you're going to roll this out, manager involvement is important, as we've continued to say throughout this presentation. Managers and leaders have to support the process by engaging in career development discussions. We must have appropriate learning resources. It's not just good enough to have an LMS and tell employees, once you have your career path, go over there and search for something to fill it. We have to give them guidance so that they can do what they need on their own to build the appropriate paths that are good for them and great for the company. Mentoring was a critical component of the process because it requires change, helping employees through supporting the process, also using some of those career fairs to then look at people's career paths, being able to print them and sit with the managers or different managers and talk about change. And also, real important is tracking those results. So the internal career moves, again, like I said earlier, use it in the recruiting process, put it on your website, share those stories online, make an entire marketing campaign out of it, because I do believe that every HR organization should have a dedicated marketing person. Because we often implement so many programs, but we forget to communicate what we've done and how we've impacted the organization. So we have to make sure that that is a critical component. That concludes the part of the formal presentation. Just a quick note about Talent Guard. We are a full-service consulting and software organization. We have several modules that are a part of our SaaS platform, our performance management tool, our succession planning tool. Development with a little smiley face is one that we talked about today. LearnTrack, that's a certification tracking management. Career pathing, that was the other tool we talked about today. We have 360 Insights, and then in a partnership we have an applicant tracking system. So a nice platform, all integrate, starts with one module, grow to the next, makes it real easy, it's seamless, it's fun, all that good stuff. So we'd love to tell you more about it if you're interested, if you're looking to automate, and if you have some of these things. If not, then we'll help you structure those. We have webinars about every 3 weeks, and instead of me listing them all here, I encourage you to go check them out on our upcoming webinars. And if anybody's interested in a demo, again, you can just click this link once you're able to download it, and we'd be happy to walk you through. And without further ado, I'm going to leave it open to some questions, and just give me a minute to bring up the question box, because I can see it popping out over here. Okay, lots of questions already. All right, I'm just going to start at the top and just work my way down. So a question from Linda. How many people did you have working on the job role profiles, and how did you make them transparent to staff? Fabulous question. We had inside Medco, it was 2 people from my team and 4 people from her team. And the 4 people were 2 in international and 2 in regional. So we kind of had these chapter heads. So in addition to that, we had leveraged, they had been using the Lominger competency model, so they had a subscription to that, and they wanted to stay using that. So we had all of the resources we needed at our fingertips to be able to pull these job role profiles together in a very quick, methodical way. Because a lot of the role profiles, as you see with a lot of competency companies, have these defined, and then all you have to do is edit. So that was an excellent way to go about that. Then what each of the heads did is they were responsible for whatever department was being rolled out, was to share them with the heads for questions and feedback. And that was just an iterative process. Oh, change this word, add this statement, don't like that word. So it was really a matter of tweaking, and the tweaking you can happen in the system every single day if you wanted it to. But that's really all it took. And to really get all the job roles, which I said were 1,600, it took a little over 6 months to do that, and that's because the team was so small. If we just leveraged the standard model and had a bunch of data entry people, we could have had that going in just a couple of months. So, but the tool was being used in the first month we loaded it with. So you really can see that benefit happen early. So Linda, I hope that answers your question. If not, just keep on asking. Oh, sorry, Natalie, about that. I didn't hear about the audio. Just saw that. I apologized. Yes, Alfred, the slides will be available after the presentation, both the slides and the audio, so that you can leverage it if you're going to be implementing some of these programs. Another question from Linda. So are those percentages based on the match between the employee assessment and the job pro competency target levels? Yes, they are. So kind of to reiterate, what happens is the employee, so if I give a job role profile, let's just say it's HR specialist, and Linda, you're the HR specialist. You're automatically, because we've predefined the HR specialist role, and that is your title, once we assign that to you, your assessment, your employee profile is automatically populated with the minimums. Then what you're able to do is go into your profile and update it, get your manager's feedback on it if you want to, and then save it. And then once you go in and start using the career pathing tool and you start comparing yourself to HR director, HR VP, or sales manager, whatever that might be, it's going to compare your assessment the way that you've last updated it against that next role. And then what happens is if we go from, let's say we're going from HR generalist to HR manager, that's one career path, that's one example. Then what it does, the system does, is it says, okay, now if you're the HR manager and you're going to the HR director, it's going to assume the minimum role requirement for the HR manager. So then when it does the percentages, it's a stepping stone. It always looks at what's that current role from the role you're assuming, from that role that you've then gained those skills for to the next role. So there's lots of percentages along the way. But what it does is it calculates that whole progression timeline over one horizon based on how we've defined that. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. And then, all right, let's see, from Bill, this is, oh, Bill, you're sweet. Thank you so much. He's giving me a compliment. I really appreciate it. Okay, on a change management note, what are some additional ways to motivate managers and especially first-line supervisors to encourage movement of their best-performing employees, oftentimes to other parts of the company? Bill, excellent comment, excellent question. So we run into this a lot, right? Because if you're a leader and you're in a position and you have a top performer, but that top performer wants to go elsewhere, guess what? That employee is going to either, because they're a top performer, they're either going to figure out how to make those moves internally or they're going to leave. That is just what happens. So when we're talking to managers and we're educating them, managers as coaches, sometimes you have to let employees fly and you have to let them move on and you have to let them experience and expand their skills. But here's the beauty. This is where I always come back to them at. You as a manager, your job is to solicit and always keep an eye on talent. If you're not doing that 75% of your time, then you're not a manager. You're not doing what you need to do as a leader in order to continually evolve your team and your department. So what happens, the complement or the sister to career pathing, that lets employees look forward, is succession. Succession allows managers to find people, right? This is what talent planning is all about. To build talent pools so that just in case we lose that top performer and they go elsewhere, we have our dibs on other people that we've created pools for who may be great replacements internally. And these employees, you know, you can start grooming them, you can start talking to them. It's that sort of thing. So in harmony, you're truly doing workforce development in that sense. But what happens is, what I see most often is these programs are implemented half-heartedly and never brought together in a very seamless way to work like an organization envisions. Well, we now have the tools to do that, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it can happen as a stepping stone and to start rolling that out. So it really is part communication and part having the right information in a way that's usable and presentable, and getting the change management part is talking and training the managers and the employees in such a way that they know how to use that tool. And once they see the value of it, then it becomes really about how are we going to grow the organization and our talent now that we can see it and we can see the gaps, so that we can have bigger conversations as a company, right? Because if you have the tools and you're administrator, then you can see gaps across the whole company. As an organization, how can we strategically move forward? So that really helps, you know, move that conversation forward, which is really all we can do in an organization, because we know change does not happen overnight. So Natalie wants to know how much time is involved and how complex is it. And Natalie, that's, you know, that's the #1 question that we get all the time, and it's really going to depend on how many job roles you have. If you have, under 50, you can have this up in a week. If you have 1,600, it's going to take a while. That's one factor. The other factor is how detailed do you want to get on your job role profiles. Some start off very basic. I say the more detailed the better because it really helps employees, and some start off being very detailed. That takes more time. It depends on when you're ready to roll it out. Like I said, I always start with one division. So let's add on the sales in the sales department. Then let's add on marketing in the marketing department. Let's connect the two. Let's add on development. Now let's connect the three. So rolling it out that way makes it less complex because you're learning as you go. People are using the system. We're adding data. Everybody knows that more value is going to be added over time. So those are some of the factors. At Talent Guard, most often, if you have the structure, we'll do all the data entry at Talent Guard for you. So we have the staff, we have the team, we just do it, we get it done, we know how to do it faster, we have tools that allow for a lot of that importing. So we do that, of course it's a fee, but once we show your team, you can hire data entries, or you can use your HR team, or you can engage other people in the organization to do it. How many people do you want to make administrators? And then that really just starts the flow. I know this looks like it's a very comprehensive process, but it's comprehensive, it's not complex. Now, if you don't have the structure, then what we look at is, all right, do we buy the structure or do we build the structure? And those are going to be dependent on your budget, again, your job roles, your time, and we've done both. So we just really try to work with each organization based on their size to figure out what's the best approach, because there is not a single best approach for any organization. And then another question from Natalie, how do you recommend managing employee expectations as they identify a path they may not regard by others as good, fit, promotable, etc.? So one of the things, Natalie, that I typically bring into this, and this is where performance, or actually 360 is probably a better tool that can help, is if I'm using career pathing, I'll use 360, and I use 360 for the one reason only. I assess culture fit. So what happens is then we look at, within the role, we can put some culture fit criteria in there, and then we can see, is the employee a culture fit based on true 360 analysis, and then how do they match against the profile. So using those two data points, one, an employee is going to see for themselves whether they're a good fit or not. But what also happens is what we do for the employee within the career pathing module, we allow just the employee. We don't allow the managers to come in unless we have succession turned on, and it's for this reason only. And we've done a lot of focus groups on this, but we do that because employees want to feel safe that if they look at career roles, it could be their manager's role, that they don't want to be penalized. They don't want to be afraid. They don't want to be in fear of looking at different roles. So we allow that. But what we also allow is inviting that manager's feedback and also printing the PDFs, sitting down with the manager, talking. And this is why I say when I teach employees in that career management course to investigate and to do that research phase, here's what I say. Go talk to people in the role that you're interested. What do they like? What don't they like? And who are indifferent in that role. You have to ask people, and then we come up with a whole bunch of questions that they should use to ask to figure out those questions. But they have to do that due diligence, and they have to do that on their own. And, one of the questions might be during that research is, what kind of person is the best fit? And then that employee can take that, go look at their profile again later and go, ooh, maybe I might not be good for that role. But that's where teaching employees that as part of this 5-phase process, these are some of the things you have to do before you truly make a determination to add it to your favorites or keep it as a role, that sort of thing. And the beauty of it also is these career paths are going to change. They're going to change yearly. They're going to change often based on the new experiences. So it is truly a journey, and it's a journey that is going to change often, and that's exactly what we want if we're doing it right. So I hope that helps, Natalie. Okay, let's see. So Carol asked, do you have a career development model or process with specific steps, resources aligned to each step? Mostly I have presentations like this with kind of higher level best practices. I specifically have a framework in-house, but it's not something that I've ever exposed. It's kind of like it's basically our sauce, like how we go about doing it and why we're successful because this is only a part of it. The other thing we do are really amazing visuals, like career path visuals, where people can play games with at the annual meetings and that sort of thing. But we haven't exposed that, Carol, outside of this kind of high-level process. Okay, any other questions that I can answer for you? And if not, I really hope that you enjoyed this format and the level of information. This was one of the presentations that came out of the survey where we took a poll of our people who attend and said, what do you want to learn more about? What do you want to hear? And this is the first one out of your specific feedback. So I really do listen, and I really do appreciate you giving us that feedback so we can make these more informative and more detailed, so that you can, either learn more about it in more detail and share it with your organization, or understand kind of some of the best practices that are needed, or the steps or the data that's required to make them successful. And as ever, I hope that you have a terrific day, and we'd love to hear from any and all of you about helping employees become more self-sufficient in their careers, and I bid you a good day.